Jehovah's Witnesses in court. Victim demands $100 million in compensation. Today we're examining a recent case that has reached the United States federal court system, involving extremely serious allegations that could have far-reaching implications for one of the world's most recognizable religious organizations. The lawsuit was filed in the Southern District Court of New York and was brought by Stella Cristina Gomes de Souza, a Brazilian woman currently residing in the United Kingdom. According to the court documents, she is seeking compensation that could exceed $100 million, making this one of the most significant individual lawsuits filed against the Jehovah's Witnesses organization in recent years. It's important to emphasize from the very beginning that everything presented here is based on allegations described in the legal proceedings, a public document filed on November 12, 2025. This investigation presents no conclusions, only describes the content of the legal action. Throughout this analysis, we'll understand who the complainant is, who the accused is, what allegedly happened according to the lawsuit, how the organization reportedly reacted, and why the case reached the United States even though the events allegedly occurred in Brazil. This is a sensitive investigation, and we'll treat it with responsibility, maintaining focus on the documentation while exploring the broader context of how religious organizations handle such allegations. The 33-page lawsuit describes the case as a civil action for damages. The complainant, Stella, states in the document that she belonged to Jehovah's Witnesses since childhood. The action says that everything allegedly began in 2011, when she was 12 years old. The name cited as the alleged aggressor is Angelo Rovietzo, presented in the lawsuit as a circuit overseer, a position of regional supervision within the structure of Jehovah's Witnesses. According to the lawsuit, this position confers spiritual and administrative authority over various congregations, which allegedly facilitated, according to the complaint, the approach to the minor. Before entering into the details of the case, the document dedicates several pages to explaining the organizational structure of Jehovah's Witnesses. According to the lawsuit, the organization would function in a highly centralized manner. The guidelines come from the world headquarters in New York. The local elders must follow detailed instructions, and important disciplinary decisions depend on superior authorization. This point is fundamental to understanding why the lawsuit was filed in the United States. The complaint argues that certain decisions related to the case would have originated from, or at least depended on, the North American leadership. This allegation of direct hierarchical connection is a central part of the legal justification presented by Stella. To fully understand the significance of this organizational structure, it's important to recognize the scope and reach of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the legal entity being sued. This organization oversees the activities of approximately 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide, operating in over 200 countries and territories. The headquarters complex in Warwick, New York, serves as the central command center for this global religious movement, publishing literature in hundreds of languages and coordinating the activities of tens of thousands of congregations around the world. According to the lawsuit, this centralized structure means that local elders, the men who serve as spiritual leaders in individual congregations, operate under a comprehensive set of policies and procedures issued from the top. The complaint describes how these policies are contained in confidential manuals and letters that provide detailed instructions on handling various situations, including allegations of wrongdoing. This becomes legally significant because it establishes what lawyers call a chain of command and accountability that extends from a local congregation in Brazil all the way to the governing body in New York. The lawsuit specifically mentions the role of circuit overseers in this hierarchy. These are traveling representatives who visit congregations on a rotating basis, typically spending a week with each congregation twice a year. According to the organizational structure described in the complaint, circuit overseers report to district overseers, who in turn answer to branch offices, which ultimately report to the world headquarters. This multi-tiered system, the lawsuit argues, means that policies affecting how abuse allegations are handled don't originate at the local level but flow down from central authority. The complaint also describes how the Watchtower organization maintains strict control over its members through a combination of spiritual authority and social pressure. According to the lawsuit, members are taught from an early age that the organization represents God's sole channel of communication with humanity, that questioning its leadership is equivalent to questioning divine authority, and that leaving the organization means losing not only one's faith community but also, in many cases, contact with family members who remain active witnesses. This context, the complaint argues, is essential to understanding why a young girl might feel powerless to resist advances from someone in a position of spiritual authority, and why she might fear the consequences of speaking out. Now we enter the most delicate content of the lawsuit. According to the complaint, Stella states that at 12 years old, she allegedly experienced situations of abuse involving the circuit overseer. The document describes that the approach would have occurred gradually, during visits and religious activities, creating a relationship of trust. The complaint also states that episodes would have happened in religious environments, including internal rooms of the Kingdom Hall, facilities of the Maripara Assembly Hall, including moments when there were events with thousands of people in the vicinity. The lawsuit reports that the minor would have been afraid to speak out, because it involved an important spiritual figure. According to the legal action, in 2011 Stella discovered that she was pregnant. She allegedly tried to hide the fact out of fear of the consequences. The document states that in January 2012, Stella had a spontaneous miscarriage at home, at 13 years old, and without medical assistance. Once again, we emphasize that this is the description present in the legal proceedings, not a statement from this channel. The lawsuit says that Stella would have demonstrated fear and resistance in continuing to accompany the circuit overseer in religious activities, but that family members did not understand the real reason at the time. The complaint states that the young woman would have changed her behavior, showed signs of anguish, and tried to avoid the accused company. According to the action, despite these signs, no one would have noticed or questioned the situation before her formal report. The document reports that in 2012, Stella finally told a close friend what was allegedly happening. This friend reportedly encouraged her to seek out the organization's elders. According to the lawsuit, Stella presented messages and detailed reports to the local congregation leaders. According to the complaint, after reporting the events, Stella would have been taken to give testimony before an internal committee of 5 elders, a type of ecclesiastical tribunal. The action states that she would have been removed from school to appear at the meeting, where, according to the complaint, she would have been invited to repeat the details in the presence of the accused. It's important to note that this is one of the central allegations of the lawsuit, presented as an example of a procedure that allegedly caused great emotional impact on the adolescent. The lawsuit also reports that after the complaints, Stella allegedly faced isolation within the congregation. She would have lost religious functions and, according to the document, rumors would have begun to circulate, suggesting that the events would have been consensual, something the complainant strongly contests in the action. The complaint states that this contributed to a period of great emotional suffering. The lawsuit dedicates an entire section to internal documents of the organization that, according to the complaint, would instruct elders to maintain confidentiality in sensitive cases, not seek civil authorities without superior authorization, and forward all complaints to the organization's central office. This part is used in the action to argue that the response to the case would have followed an institutional protocol, contributing to the situation not being communicated to the police at the time. One of the most controversial policies highlighted in the lawsuit is what's known as the two-witness rule. According to the complaint, this policy requires that before action can be taken against someone accused of serious wrongdoing, there must be either 2 witnesses to the act itself, or the accused must confess. The lawsuit argues that this policy, when applied to cases of child abuse, creates an almost impossible standard since such acts rarely occur in the presence of witnesses. The complaint suggests that in Stella's case, because there were no other witnesses to corroborate her account, and because the accused allegedly denied the allegations, the organization's internal procedures would have been stacked against her from the beginning. The lawsuit also discusses the organization's stance on reporting such matters to secular authorities. According to the complaint, internal policies historically instructed elders to contact the legal department at headquarters before taking any action, including reporting to police. The legal department would then advise whether reporting was legally required in that particular jurisdiction. The complaint alleges that this policy prioritized legal liability over child protection, and that in jurisdictions where reporting was not legally mandatory, the default position was to handle matters internally rather than involve law enforcement. This becomes particularly significant in the context of Brazil, where the alleged events occurred. The lawsuit suggests that at the time of these events, Brazilian law may not have imposed the same mandatory reporting requirements that exist in some other countries. According to the complaint, this meant that under the organization's policies, the elders who received Stella's report would have been instructed to maintain confidentiality and handle the matter through internal procedures rather than alerting police or child protection services. The complaint further alleges that these policies serve to protect the organization's reputation at the expense of vulnerable children. By keeping allegations internal, the lawsuit argues, the organization avoided public scrutiny and potential legal liability, while alleged victims were left without the protection and support that secular authorities could have provided. The lawsuit characterizes this as a systematic failure of institutional safeguarding that enabled abuse to occur and continue. According to the court documents, the organization maintains what it calls judicial committees, internal tribunals composed of elders who hear cases of alleged wrongdoing. The lawsuit describes how these committees operate in secret, with strict confidentiality rules that prevent information from being shared even with other members of the congregation. The complaint alleges that this secrecy serves the organization's interests by preventing victims from finding support or corroboration from others who might have had similar experiences with the same perpetrator. The document states that Stella, now almost 30 years old, lives in the United Kingdom and faces various mental health problems including severe anxiety, depression, complex psychological trauma, and adaptation difficulties. The lawsuit also mentions that she would need continuous medical follow-up. One of the most commented sections of the lawsuit states that after correspondence sent by Stella to the Jehovah's Witnesses World Headquarters, organization representatives allegedly traveled to the United Kingdom to speak with her. According to the action, during this meeting, a proposal of $50,000 would have been made as a form of settlement, an amount that Stella immediately refused for considering it insufficient given the suffering reported. This information is also contained in the legal proceedings. Finally, the lawsuit asks the court for compensation of no less than $100 million. The justification presented by the complaint is the emotional impact throughout her life, psychological damages, and allegations of institutional failures that would have contributed to worsening the situation. This investigation has analyzed in a journalistic and investigative manner the main points of a recent legal action filed against the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. We emphasize once again that everything presented here is based on allegations contained in the legal proceedings. No conclusion is made by this channel. The case is still ongoing, and new information may emerge as the court advances in analyzing the facts and defenses. Throughout this examination of the court documents, several disturbing patterns emerge that deserve careful consideration. The lawsuit presents a narrative of institutional response that allegedly prioritized organizational reputation over the well-being of a vulnerable minor. According to the complaint, the ecclesiastical tribunal process, where a young teenager was reportedly required to recount traumatic experiences in the presence of her alleged abuser, raises serious questions about appropriate safeguarding procedures within religious organizations. The document extensively details how the hierarchical structure of Jehovah's Witnesses functions, with decision-making authority concentrated at the world headquarters in New York. This organizational framework becomes legally significant because it forms the basis for jurisdiction in United States court, even though the alleged events occurred thousands of miles away in Brazil. The complaint argues that policies and procedures that allegedly governed how local elders should respond to such allegations originated from directives issued by the American leadership, thereby establishing the necessary legal connection to pursue the case in federal court. The lawsuit also describes how Stella's life trajectory was allegedly profoundly altered by these events. From a young girl participating actively in her faith community, she reportedly became isolated, stigmatized, and eventually left both the organization and her home country. The complaint paints a picture of someone whose developmental years were marked by trauma, followed by years of struggling with the psychological aftermath. According to the court documents, she continues to require ongoing mental health treatment and faces daily challenges stemming from experiences that occurred when she was just entering adolescence. What makes this case particularly noteworthy from a legal and social perspective is the allegation regarding the settlement offer. According to the lawsuit, after Stella reached out to the organization's headquarters describing her experiences and their impact on her life, representatives traveled internationally to meet with her. The complaint states that during this meeting, they proposed a financial settlement of $50,000. The lawsuit characterizes this as grossly inadequate given the severity and lifelong consequences of what she allegedly endured. This alleged settlement attempt, if proven, could be interpreted by the court as an acknowledgement by the organization of some level of responsibility, though the organization has not yet filed its formal response to these allegations. The complaint also focuses extensively on internal policies that allegedly governed how elders should handle reports of abuse. According to the lawsuit, these policies emphasized confidentiality and required consultation with headquarters before involving secular authorities. The document suggests this created an environment where institutional concerns about reputation and legal liability potentially took precedence over child protection and victim support. These are serious allegations that, if substantiated, could have implications not just for this individual case but for how religious organizations more broadly structure their safeguarding procedures. It's worth noting that throughout the legal filing, there are references to specific dates, locations, and individuals, suggesting that the complainant is prepared to provide detailed testimony should the case proceed to trial. The lawsuit mentions the Maripara Assembly Hall, a facility that hosts large religious gatherings, and describes how alleged abuse occurred even during major events when thousands of people were present in the building. This detail, according to the complaint, demonstrates both the boldness of the alleged perpetrator and the vulnerability of the victim, who reportedly felt she had no one to turn to despite being surrounded by her faith community. The document also addresses the cultural and familial context. According to the complaint, Stella grew up in an environment where religious authority figures were deeply respected and questioning them was discouraged. The lawsuit suggests this cultural dynamic made it extremely difficult for a young girl to speak out against someone in a position of significant spiritual authority. When she did finally report what was allegedly happening, the complaint states she faced not support and protection, but rather a process that required her to defend her account while her alleged abuser maintained his position of authority and respect within the community. As this case moves forward through the American legal system, it will likely raise important questions about religious freedom, organizational accountability, and the protection of vulnerable individuals within faith communities. The lawsuit represents not just one person's search for justice and compensation, but potentially a broader examination of how religious organizations should structure their child protection policies and respond when allegations of abuse emerge. The outcome could influence how similar cases are handled in the future and what legal responsibilities religious organizations have when they operate across international boundaries with centralized governance structures. The complainant's decision to pursue this case publicly, with her name attached to court documents that will remain in the public record, demonstrates what the lawsuit characterizes as her commitment to accountability. According to the complaint, she is not only seeking personal compensation for the harm she allegedly suffered but also hoping to shine a light on institutional practices that she believes enabled abuse and protected perpetrators at the expense of victims. Whether these allegations will be proven in court remains to be seen, as the legal process is just beginning and the defendants have yet to present their side of the story. This case serves as a reminder of the complex intersection between religious practice, organizational governance, and legal accountability in our modern globalized world. As we await further developments in this litigation, it highlights the ongoing societal conversation about how we protect the most vulnerable members of our communities, particularly children within institutions that wield significant moral and spiritual authority over their members' lives. What makes this lawsuit particularly significant is that it's far from an isolated incident. Over the past 2 decades, the Watchtower organization has faced hundreds of lawsuits worldwide related to allegations of child abuse and institutional failures to protect minors. In the United States alone, courts have awarded millions of dollars in damages in cases where juries found that the organization's policies contributed to harm suffered by victims. The complaint in Stella's case references this broader pattern of litigation, suggesting that what allegedly happened to her represents not an aberration but rather a predictable consequence of systemic policies that prioritize organizational interests over child safety. One particularly notable case that bears similarities to Stella's allegations occurred in California, where a jury awarded tens of millions of dollars to a victim who demonstrated that the organization knew about an abuser's history but failed to warn the congregation or report to authorities. That case, like Stella's, centered on the allegation that headquarters-level policies created an environment where abusers could operate with relative impunity as long as they maintained their denials and there were no additional witnesses. In Australia, a Royal Commission investigation into institutional responses to child sexual abuse conducted extensive hearings regarding Jehovah's Witnesses' practices. The Commission reviewed over 1,000 allegations of child abuse within the organization in Australia alone, finding that not a single case had been reported to police by the organization. The Commission's findings were damning, concluding that the organization's policies, including the two-witness rule, were inadequate to protect children and that the organization had prioritized its own reputation over the welfare of abuse victims. The complaint in Stella's case cites this investigation as evidence of a global pattern of institutional failure. Similarly, in the United Kingdom, the Charity Commission conducted investigations into safeguarding practices within Jehovah's Witnesses congregations, issuing official warnings and requiring changes to policies. These investigations revealed that even when the organization was aware of credible allegations, the emphasis on maintaining confidentiality and handling matters internally often meant that dangerous individuals remained in positions where they had access to children. The lawsuit also points to cases in other countries, including the Netherlands, where courts have ordered the organization to pay substantial fines for refusing to provide documents related to abuse allegations, and Ireland, where survivors have come forward with accounts that parallel many of the details in Stella's complaint. This international pattern of litigation and investigation, the lawsuit argues, demonstrates that the policies allegedly applied in Stella's case were not unique to Brazil but rather represented standard operating procedures imposed from the top of the organizational hierarchy. What's particularly troubling, according to the complaint, is that despite this mounting evidence and legal pressure, the organization has been slow to implement meaningful reforms. The lawsuit alleges that even today, variations of the two-witness rule remain in effect, that reporting to authorities is still not universally mandated by organizational policy, and that the culture of confidentiality and institutional self-protection continues to create risks for vulnerable members, particularly children. The complaint also addresses the organization's public statements about these issues. In various official publications and press releases, the Watchtower organization has stated that it abhors child abuse and takes such allegations seriously. However, the lawsuit argues that these public statements are contradicted by the actual policies and practices that govern how elders handle such cases. The complaint characterizes this as a gap between public relations messaging designed to protect the organization's image and the reality experienced by victims who navigate the internal judicial system. In Stella's case specifically, the lawsuit alleges that her experience exemplifies how these systemic issues play out in individual lives. A young girl, raised to view the organization as God's earthly representative, allegedly victimized by someone in a position of significant spiritual authority, confronted with an internal process that required her to prove her case to a standard that was virtually impossible to meet, and then left to deal with the emotional and psychological consequences without adequate support or accountability. The complaint suggests that this pattern has repeated itself in countless congregations around the world, with a primary variable being whether victims eventually find the courage and resources to pursue legal action. The $100 million figure that Stella is seeking reflects not just compensation for her individual suffering, according to the lawsuit, but also a statement about the seriousness of institutional accountability. The complaint argues that only through substantial financial consequences will organizations be motivated to prioritize child protection over institutional preservation. Previous cases have shown that even multi-million-dollar judgments have not been sufficient to prompt comprehensive policy reforms, suggesting that even larger awards may be necessary to create meaningful change. The lawsuit also raises questions about the organization's financial capacity to pay such judgments. The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society controls substantial assets, including valuable real estate holdings in multiple countries, printing facilities, and investment portfolios. The organization has engaged in significant property sales in recent years, including the sale of its former Brooklyn headquarters complex for hundreds of millions of dollars. The complaint suggests that the organization has ample resources to compensate victims, and that claims of financial hardship should not be accepted as justification for avoiding accountability. Furthermore, the lawsuit addresses the unique challenges faced by victims who leave the organization. According to the complaint, the practice of shunning or disfellowshipping means that individuals who speak out against the organization or who are deemed to have violated its rules can be completely cut off from their entire social network. Family members are instructed to limit or eliminate contact with disfellowshipped individuals, even close relatives. The lawsuit alleges that this practice creates a powerful deterrent against reporting abuse or pursuing legal action, as victims must choose between seeking justice and maintaining relationships with everyone they know and love. The complaint characterizes this as a form of institutional coercion that compounds the original harm and makes recovery even more difficult.